This is the story of a kind young man. Many described him as likable and even friendly. No one would have expected young Edmund Kemper to be later known as the Co-Ed Butcher.
My name is Barnaby Stewart, and today on this episode of World Famous Killers, we're here in Burbank, California to learn a little bit more about the infamous Edmund Kemper, otherwise known as the Co-Ed Butcher. Let's go take a look. Edmund was born on the 18th of December, 1948, making him a Sagittarius. He was living in a household with two other siblings. He was the middle child, and living with, well, I guess you could say, strict parents. Edmund had to deal with harsh and aggressive verbal abuse from his mother ever since a young age. His parents were divorced in 1957, which led him on a dark, downward spiral. Ever since the divorce, the father Ed idolized so much started to become a little bit more and more distant. So Ed was having left, dealing with the abandonment from his father, and having to deal with his cuckoo mom. To learn a little bit more about Ed's early life, I'm here at Dr. Joel Ford's office. Let's go take a look.
Edmund's violent habits started at a very, very young age. The first sign was probably when he started to cut off the heads of his sister's dolls. Nobody thought anything of it, because it just seemed like a boy was bugging his sisters. Nothing abnormal there, but that was very, very far from the truth. At the age of 10, Edmund made the comment that if he ever kissed his teacher, he'd have to kill her, which is a little strange for a 10-year-old to say. And that's kind of when we start to wonder, what exactly is wrong with him?
Edmund transitioned from harming dolls to actual animals. His first victim was the family cat, whom he buried alive, but didn't stop there. Kemper later dug up the cats and started to play with them, something that was pretty common amongst most serial killers. And this is total foreshadowing for his future. These signs of early trouble even continued to the point of having dark fantasies of killing his mother. With all these factors combined, you're looking at a young male who has violent and destructive fantasies all before adolescence. So you're looking at an individual who has a broken home, a cold and distant mother, an absent father through a divorce. It's simply a recipe for disaster.
Edmund's mother treated him very poorly, locking him in an ill-lit basement with nothing but a blanket and a pillow and one dim light. This was all purely out of the fear that he was going to rape his siblings. So as anyone sane would do, he left home and headed to LA in search of the dad who he idolized so much. But when he finally got there, he was rejected. So, being out of options, Ed went to go live with his grandparents on their farm. Unfortunately for Edmund, his grandmother had very similar traits to his mother, so this made for many conflicts within the house. After one argument, Kemper finally had enough. He stormed off and went to go get his hunting rifle that his grandfather gave him, and when his grandfather was out, he shot and killed his grandmother with the .22 caliber rifle. Ed decided that his grandfather didn't deserve to go through the grief, so as his grandfather was walking up the driveway towards the house, Kemper shot him too. This was when Ed was only 15 years old. I'm here at Edmund Kemper's grandparents' old house. It's fascinating that Edmund's violent fantasies would be first realized just inside here. Let's go take a look. It was here in this kitchen where Edmund killed his grandmother by shooting her once in the head, 2 times in the back, and then finally finishing her off by stabbing her multiple times. You can still even see some of the stains on the ground.
After killing his grandparents, he called his mom, who told him to confess his crimes to the police. After doing so, he was diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia just before being sent to the Atascadero State Hospital. Edmund was a smart but intimidating person. With an IQ of around 145 and being around 6'9", many feared him. When Kemper got to the hospital, he was noted to be a model prisoner, which led him to be a trusted assistant amongst the psychology staff. Now this is troubling for numerous reasons. Not only did he have access to all of the previous sex offenders' cases, ultimately learning their different techniques, but he also had access to all of the psychology test papers. Through these papers, he learned what to say and how to act, all in order to appear normal and ultimately be let go earlier. He also learned the criteria for different diagnoses, so when they treated him, they really thought they cured him. When Kemper was finally released 5 years later, he went to go live with his mother, even after being told not to. This is where we would start to see the first of his infamous co-ed killings.
Kemper was good friends with some of the police officers over in Santa Cruz, mainly because he was the busboy at one of the police bars. As he got closer with them, one of them even gave him his handcuffs, while another let him borrow his gun. And that same year, he began working for the highway department to help pass some time. Unfortunately, he was hit by a car, leaving him unable to work. So he turned his mind to other pursuits, you could say. He noticed the large amounts of girls hitchhiking in the area, which gave him a very, very dark idea. He began storing a variety of tools in his trunk, including a gun, a knife, and even handcuffs.
Edmund started by doing practice rounds. He would go all over Central California and even Los Angeles and just pick up hitchhikers and use it as almost a practice round until he felt confident enough to act out his fantasies. The first two victims were 18-year-olds Anita Lucetia and Marianne Pesh. Edmund would start off by insisting that the passenger's door wasn't closed properly, so he'd reach across the car to open and close it, but little did the passenger know, he would drop a chapstick behind the handle, so if they decided to leave the car, the chapstick wouldn't allow it to work. After pulling over into a remote area, he forced Anita to climb into the trunk, and then stabbed and strangled Marianne until she was dead. Kemper then opened the car trunk and killed Anita. Back at the hotel room, he dismembered them just before engaging in some sort of sexual activity with the corpses. He later dumped their remains in the mountains. Two other girls would meet very similar fates to Marianne and Anita. One being Cindy Shaw, whose head was eventually buried in Edmund's mom's backyard, just underneath his window.
After Cindy's murder was the beginning of the end for Edmund. In April of 1973, the sheriff's office received a dealer's record of sales. One of the record quotes said that Edmund tried to buy a gun, but his record showed that he was involved in a murder in Madera County some years ago. That'll be the murder of his grandparents.
So the question became, who's gonna go take the gun away from this kid? Eventually, a detective went over to his house to go retrieve it.
Sir, this is Officer Larry McIntosh. I need to see a permit for that gun.
When Ed handed over the gun, the detective thought it had all ended there, but Edmund was freaked out. He thought the detectives were playing a game with him and that they secretly knew he was the murderer. His first thought was, oh, what if my mom finds out I'm the killer? So, being the kind soul he is, he knew his mom didn't deserve that embarrassment. On the Saturday before Easter of 1973, Ed would finally commit a crime he'd been fantasizing about for years. He hit his mom several times in the head with a hammer and decapitated it just before having oral sex with it. Afterwards, he placed her head on the mantle just above the fireplace. Now, what's interesting about this is that he made the point of removing her vocal cords, something she used to torment him during his childhood years. Before leaving the house, Kemper left a little surprise for the detectives. a note that said, "Not sloppy and incomplete, gents. Just a lack of time. Got things to do." Shortly after committing the crimes, Edmund confessed to all the murders, where he went into great detail on how, when, and where the crimes were done.
In October of 1973, Edmund was tried for multiple murders where they played his confession tapes in front of all the involved family members. And on the 8th of November, he was found guilty on 8 counts of first-degree murder and was sentenced to life imprisonment.